get in.
Thanks so much, guys, for being here on the early panel, particularly in a sector that's been a bit beaten down and struggling a bit. Is always going to be interesting. We're going to try and make it a bit spicy today. My name's Swart. I work at Bitkraft. We're one of the largest gaming funds, particularly focused on the intersection of crypto and gaming, crypto and interactive media. Globally, we're an early stage investor, and I've got the privilege today to moderate and chat with these fine gentlemen. I think we're going to just start off with a very brief round of introductions, and I want to start with you, Yat. Just a quick intro, and also just to set the scene. You've got a great sort of way of framing why gaming makes sense in the crypto and the Web3 context.
Well, yeah, so thank you. My name is Yat, Chairman, co-founder of Animoca Brands. We're a company that is both a builder and an investor in the space. We have today over 165 gaming portfolios in Web3, so we certainly hope that's going to work out. I think to some extent, the sentiment is somewhat reflected in the number of the fact that the seats have been filled here, right? So it's a little bit of a moment. But we do believe that Web3 gaming will have its big moment by the end of the year. Generally speaking, though, the reason why we're so bullish about Web3 gaming is that it is really the most natural path of mass adoption for people. The youth understand digital currency, they're basically existing only in virtual, all of the values in that area. If you think about, for instance, you ask the children what they want for Christmas, very likely it's going to be something digital, whether it's Robux, or Fortnite skins, or basically the next PlayStation. So it's already existing in a very virtual way. It's just now how do we translate that going from Web 2 to Web 3? There's also one thing to understand, which is that there's a big difference between Asia and let's call it the West. Yeah. So the West is broadly more negative on this for a number of reasons, whereas Asia is much more optimistic and positive around it. So you don't have the same connotation. There's also the reason why Asia has pretty much been the center of growth for Web3 gaming for the time being.
Yeah, Justin, I'm just going to go to you because you've got interesting background where you've kind of crossed the chasm from Web 2 to Web 3. Can you just give us a bit of an intro and what you saw?
Sure. My name is Justin. Thanks for having me. I've been building games for almost 20 years. My first company was Zynga, the social mobile gaming company. Built Zynga Poker when I was 19, dropped out of school, and we turned it into a company that really popularized freemium and social games, mobile games in the West. And what was cool about that for me was we were inventing a new business model for games. Basically, what happens if you make a game free and you make it a service instead of a packaged good? And I've been interested in Web3 because it unlocks same opportunity for games again. The question is, how do we change the business model again for games to make it better for users, to make it better for game creators, publishers, and the entire ecosystems? I personally think we're just at the very early stages of this. There's a lot of experiments that have been tried, and now I'm working on a new project called Open Game Protocol, which sort of aims to coordinate communities and capital together to create a new kind of game ecosystem.
And then from your side, you've got interesting early iteration of Top Shot, showing pretty strong product market fit in terms of what we can see using Yat's kind of view on moving into a more digital realm and ownership of these assets. Can you give us a bit of a background and what you've seen since then from Top Shot?
Sure, absolutely. My name is Roham, Gharegozlou, founder and CEO of Dapper Labs. The NBA Top Shot is one of Dapper's products. We also run NFL All Day, this Pinnacle, and the company started with the launch of CryptoKitties back in 2017, which is, I think, maybe the first real kind of Web3 game, and our company's thesis has always been that crypto is much more than currency, and similar to Justin, I believe we're just at the early stages of kind of discovering what exactly that is now with all the different tools available at our disposal, how to give value back to communities. Top Shot had a very interesting journey. Initially it started off as purely a digital collecting experience and $1 billion of transaction volume in its first year. Since then, we've been very focused on beefing up the fandom elements, kind of integrating it deeply into the partners ecosystem. So if you're a big NBA fan, you do things with the NBA, you get rewarded in Top Shot. If you earn status in Top Shot, that gives you access and benefits within the NBA ecosystem. We're running the same playbook with the NFL and also with Disney. And I'm very excited to talk about how you can kind of think about these products in a different way when you're focused on that end user fan rather than, maybe the folks that most of us are here, which is the early adopters, the folks that drove Top Shot's early momentum. But ultimately, it's about kind of building long-term community, building sustainable user experiences, and then creating service area for others to build on top.
Awesome. Typically at these kind of panels, particularly on the gaming side, you have these very interesting sounding theses. They make a lot of sense. They're very true and dear to our hearts. I definitely agree with them. We've kind of heard these every year kind of going by. And the sector has clearly had its kind of ups and downs. My question to you guys broadly is, what have you changed your mind on in the past sort of 3 to 5 years? You mentioned actually Infinity is one of the sort of early examples of crypto gaming. There's been a whole lot of games since then. Some of their theses I think still apply, but there's been some learnings throughout that journey. So what have you guys changed your mind on? Or what view did you hold previously, or what have you changed your mind on the past 5 years?
mean, I think that one of the first thesis points was around, when we did a lot of game acquisitions of Web2 companies and moved into Web3.
Yeah.
The assumption being that Web2 either will much more naturally adopt a sort of a Web3 paradigm, because they do feel that they have a sense of ownership of these items.
Yeah.
However, as it turned out, without sort of a financial literacy rail, which is what happened in places like Axie, there was actually very little incentive for them to do more than just play the game. So the kind of conversion rate ended up becoming almost similar to what we have with freemium, which is a single-digit conversion rate from saying, oh, okay, I'm going from Web 2 to Web 3 game, and then actually I could trade these items and I could do some financial stuff with it.
Yeah.
That actually turned out to be a very small conversion rate, where people were expecting to be a much larger conversion rate. So that at least we appear to realize that it needs to come with some kind of financial literacy or an expectation for people to understand why you do it.
Yeah.
And I guess you can see some parallels when you think about sort of trading with skins, for instance. It's not that every person in the game is trading skins.
Yeah.
It's a subsection, a small percentage, although they trade a large volume. I think the other thing that we came to realize was that there is also we'll almost say political view when it comes to sort of games and game design. And so that's at least, something we also didn't expect, which is that we would thought that all gamers are the same. In a way, you have to play games and whatever. But it turned out that this is what we saw between the East and the West. In the West, I would argue that most gamers and game designers are generally more socialist minded, right? They're designed for equality, they're designed for structures around this has to be fair. Whereas in Asia, it's pay to play.
Yeah.
It's like I can pay money to have a better experience, and that's okay. In Asia, we have things like VIP gaming. So consequently, this idea of paying for something to have an improved experience is not viewed as negatively. In fact, it's viewed as an opportunity. Whereas in the West, it's very much shunned upon, which is, I guess, part of the reason why gamers in the West have been so resistant to it, right? So these are some of the things that, there's a lot more, but I'll just start off with that consumer side before I go into the business side. Please.
Yeah, I agree with that. For us, it's fungible tokens. We started our company based on the sort of thesis that, hey, you needed a new kind of crypto asset to create a whole new kind of game experience. And obviously, we had to invent the non-fungible token standard to build CryptoKitties. Whereas today, it's not that I changed my mind. It's more that we have a kind of regulatory green light to actually experiment with fungible tokens as consumer products. And so we can imagine new classes of games and applications that are incorporating token incentives, incorporating token decision-making, et cetera. And in many cases, a fungible tokens, sort of whatever people call meme coins or we're talking about app tokens, might be a better medium for coordination and for user acquisition, for user rewards than NFTs, than sort of making a non-fungible token. So we really now take the question of, hey, does this thing need to be individually unique? If so, use the NFT standard, or is it more of a sort of loyalty points kind of system, in which case you have more design space to sort of experiment with? A couple of days ago, the first sort of NFT project, CryptoKitties, launched Bitcoins, meow coins, technically. And so we're trying to experiment with how do you create sustainable user acquisition instead of sustainable community? How do you kind of make it so that these products can reward the communities that add value to them, rather than sort of rewarding an early adopter community and then sort of chiseling out, in a sense, onto the next kind of game. So that's a big part of what we're experimenting with outside of NBA, outside of a licensed IP product. But you can also imagine those things getting folded into, okay, well, how does a major brand or an influencer or anyone with a community use crypto tokens to manage their community, to give back to their community, and to own their community, a direct relationship with their community that crisscrosses between different social applications, right? Whether it's TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, etc. So that's a big focus area of ours next views.
Let me quickly just push back on using tokens as user acquisition. I think you'll probably have a comment on this, is that I think they're great behavioral mechanisms to get people to do things, but history kind of shows that they've been incredibly expensive for user acquisition. You could have pumped 10 times as many user acquisition dollars into the most expensive channels and probably been better off, depending on how you measure it. If they treat it pretty much like pseudo equity, that's an expensive thing that you're giving away. How do you think about that in the context of user acquisition for games broadly? Maybe you've got a response, but also I think Justin, spend your time in this, so maybe you've got...
Yeah, and we built a product on Telegram called Gems, which was one of the earlier games that went viral last summer.
Yep.
And we got to 20 million users. And I think what I've seen is that actually the crypto is extremely powerful for user acquisition. And I think there are a lot of challenges in keeping the players and engaging them. But I would say a lot of that comes down to thoughtful design around what the product is in the first place. So in my mind, right now, when you look at a typical Web2 game, game developer, they're putting up money for Facebook ads, right? And the question is, do you want to raise capital from Bitkraft? And just to play devil's advocate a little bit more, to take $2 million from you guys to get $1 million to Facebook to buy 300,000 users.
Yeah.
And I'll say that we did.
That's cheap, by the way.
That's cheap. That's cheap. And I'll say that like our organic spend on gems was de minimis. I mean, we got 4 million users and we owe an airdrop to these players still. But the way I look at it is that's actually a much more efficient way to finance user acquisition. So I think the question then becomes, how do you keep these players engaged and retained? Which I don't think that most projects have done successfully, but certainly as an attention grabber, there's a few other things that are as powerful as that on the internet, even excluding outside of Web3. You won't find Web2 game developers that are able to get 20 million users into it.
Well, 20 million users with that degree of fandom that turn into your evangelists, that create content for you, that build on top of your platform. Like I think you get something that you wouldn't otherwise be able to kind of pay for. But I 100% agree with the point that it's been completely a shell game or a sort of pump and dump game until now, right? And I'm just saying it's worth experimenting with, playing around with that design space, figuring out how to actually do it sustainably, because it's kind of such a powerful use case. It's almost like digital uranium. It can blow up in your face, or you can try to harness it and create nuclear energy from it. I don't know how popular that is in this part of the world. But point being that I think it's just scratching the surface, but it's a big enough opportunity that it makes sense to play around with it. And just like when sort of Top Shot and CryptoKitties, when you show that business use case, you're going to see half of the next Y Combinator class having tokens, because they're going to let them break through the noise, reward their communities, outcompete their centralized competitors, and bring something new. Now, again, how sustainable that is depends exactly what Justin is saying. What role does that play in your application, and who are you bringing in? And then how do you keep them engaged?
So when you think of airdrops, I mean, airdrops to us is really the inverse of basically advertising upside down. In the sense that in the gaming industry, when you think about the platform fees that are paid to Apple, Facebook, Google, Steam, and then you think about the advertiser fees, basically the platforms take half the take. And that's the crazy thing. Right. And how much of that money goes back into the game ecosystem? I don't see Apple investing in games. I don't see Facebook investing in games. And how much of that money goes actually back to the gamers as well? Some kind of incentive to play a game? Zero. Right. You give it to an airdrop. Sure, maybe many of them sell, maybe most of them will sell, but the percentage of people that reinvest back into the game and try it out is infinitely larger than the kind of money that you spend on those platforms.
Well, and you're paying for advertising, but every second you show advertising to your potential customers, you're stealing time and energy from them too. So the advertising is a negative to sort of the public.
No, and I think the challenge with Gamey, which was actually one of the original Telegram games pre-token, so then they did launch a token as well. They did rise to about 30 million type users, and now they're back down after launch of the token, right? Around 4 million sort of daily actives. That's still very, very good, right? And so when you think about it, yes, sure, you get a whole bunch of people. You also get a whole bunch of bots, right? But the way that I look at bots and airdrop farming is a little bit like how click fraud used to be 20, 25, 30 years ago. Early days of advertising, entered the industry, advertising industry, you had bots all over the world, literally just pretending you click so they basically advertise dollars. That's kind of the stage we're in right now, technologically, but we're getting better with reputation layers, systems around to ensure that you're dropping airdrops to the real users, right? So we're seeing advancements, and we see this a little bit with NFTs, right? Where, hey, you have a Bored Ape or you have a CryptoKitty and you've had it for 1 or 2 years, I'm going to give you a bigger airdrop. Right. Why? Because you have a reputation that I want to acquire. So this is open season for user acquisition. Today, if we're buying advertising on any of these platforms, I first of all don't know who the user is. I'm taking an assumed promise that you're kind of giving me the target. I don't really know what the target is. I'm really just dealing with an algorithm that is not actual market. It's actually dealing with an algorithm that benefits the platform. So it's completely different. That's why it's just a better system.
All of this sounds amazing. If all of this is so good, why do traditional publishers, why do they not buy into this? What are they missing?
What we've experienced is that this is generally more of a negative issue in the West than in the East. So in Asia, all the Korean game companies, and many of the Japanese like Sega, Square Enix, Nexon, I mean, they're all looking at Web3. Whether they succeeded or not, that's a different question. But they're actually really focused on it and thinking, hey, we could have a Web3 team, a blockchain team. But in the West, it's really only Ubisoft, maybe some other ones, right, that have tried it, and they've been punished by it from the market because of the general perception of it. And I think that's basically pushed people away because the regulatory framework has not been helpful. But I think, again, all of this will change. And I think this will change not from the big companies. I think it will change for the indie game developers. Indie game developers are royally crushed. The discovery engines for games does not exist anymore. Apple removes basically discovery from a market standpoint. Rankings don't mean anything. So that means that if you're an indie game developer, you're kind of screwed. I think you have a higher chance of making money on a meme coin than launching a successful indie game. That's what it feels like. because you could put all your passion and effort into a game and more will be discovered. So what's the mechanism in which you can find new discovery, maybe through airdrops and new marketing channels? And that's basically going to be Web3. And typically what you see with innovation, it happens usually at the fringe anyway.
Yeah.
When you think about mobile gaming didn't succeed because EA and Activision were like, ooh, mobile games, right?
Yeah.
It was startups in Finland, UK, and Asia that sort of created something, became really big, and that's when the big guys came in. And I think the same thing will happen here.
How would you define kind of indie gaming? What differentiates an indie game?
I mean, an indie game is typically a small studio, can be venture backed, anywhere from 5 to 25 people in the team. Typically, they would not be launching AAA type titles because they don't have the budget for it. And normally, funding can range anywhere from $1 to $10 million. But I would say 1 to 3 is the sweet spot that we see in indie gaming to kick off.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. From your guys' perspective, what's the apprehension from traditional brands and corporates? Roham, you've worked with a couple. There might have been some apprehension in those discussions you've had.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about the IP holder and the brand perspective. And I'd be curious to hear Justin's take on, hey, why didn't big companies see social gaming and create that for Zynga to even kind of exist and now become one of the major publishers? And I think from our perspective, you also see a huge difference between the IP holders that are sort of working with external companies for their digital products versus the game companies that are mostly build their own digital products and have their own sort of engineering teams with their own biases and their own inertia. Because the big IP holders, whether it's our existing partners, NBA, NFL, Disney, or others, if you go to any sports conference, you will have a digital collectibles panel. It has taken us a fait accompli. It's going to be guaranteed for sure. People collect things physically, they're going to collect things digitally. People spend on their fandom physically, they're going to spend on their fandom digitally. And then if they're spending in the digital world, if I'm an IP holder, I want that asset to be open, right? And when I'm talking about Web3, it's just being open platforms versus closed platforms. So I want it to live forever inside a gaming company's servers or on Facebook or on Snapchat. Or do I want it to have this kind of relationship where I own the direct connection with my fan and the fan owns the asset? I license a company to build that asset, but I can always license another company to build that asset. And I think that kind of orientation means that IP holders, they understand Web3 is really strong for them. And there's, of course, inertia from third-party developers, but you just got to show them the business model. And now that there's no regulatory overhang on it, they will chase it. But it is going to be the smaller companies that find that new business model, that find that new design space that kind of brings on a new kind of user base and monetizes them in a new way. And then everybody else kind of copies, at their pace, which is sometimes, slower. Curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think like a lot of game companies start as technology companies and then they eventually turn into media and IP focused companies. And so if you look through the history of a lot of the biggest game companies, they usually start by figuring out some sort of thing that gets them leverage over other companies because they have a deep understanding of some new technology platform. You even see this back with companies like Epic. Even Sega was a little bit about figuring out how to get games to work on systems in an unauthorized way. That was Electronic Arts on Sega. Yeah. But there's a story of like many of the great game companies we look at now were deeply technical companies that then earned the right to become a big company that is mostly a media company. And so like as a broader framework, why don't they understand crypto? Because there is no proven business model for them to apply their IP to, and just to come in and have a bunch of who are mostly media executives come in and just say this for this, this for this, this for this, and get what they wanted. And I think to Roham's credit, Dapper is probably closer to that than anybody else, the sort of top shop model than what you guys were able to do with it. But I think they're waiting for it. So when they've seen signs of success, they come in very hard. But we've had a number of false starts. And so now it's like a little bit like the boy who cried wolf, right? They're like, wow, Axie was huge and Top Shot was huge and this was huge. And they're kind of waiting in the wings to say, what is the thing that actually works multiple times in a row so that we can come in and bring our IP to bear. And I don't think they have expertise internally to evaluate like the new design space that crypto allows. They need somebody else to solve that for them and then to come in by acquisition or by partnership. And so like more broadly speaking, I think that's the biggest reason. The appetite's there. We've seen it when we get those moments where something sparks. So
we spoke about it backstage. What is some of that appetite, that interesting stuff, that liquidity coming to the sector that you're excited about?
I mean, one thing, and I guess this is also something where earlier to your first question about sort of what we changed our mind on. For instance, when we first started, we started to, working on CryptoKitties as a publisher in Asia with what became Dapper, because actually it was still before Dapper was even formed, right? And in the beginning, that narrative was all around basically NFTs and ownership in gaming, which is, the number one reason why blockchain gamers play blockchain games in all the surveys. But it wasn't really until DeFi Summer came along that we actually came to realize that, wait, hold on, this token thing actually is a more powerful engine. And maybe the token is a product in and of itself. And there's something there. That's kind of when we started leaning into the whole token ecosystem, the fungible token ecosystem. And the thing that we've got to understand is that tokens broadly, not just in gaming, in Web3 are very much indicative of market pricing and market information, the same way that we have it in the stock market and the commodities market. But really, when it comes to attention, media, and brand. So, I became cool with my kids for a moment when I started talking to them about Choka. That was last year. And I know nothing about Choka. Yeah. Choke is actually a TikTok.
Yes.
So my kids are like, my daughter is like, it's because of the token. My daughter's like, well, not Choka. Okay, kind of cool, right? But actually, it was because it was a token that was flying, and I was like, what's this, right?
Yeah.
And actually, it turns out that when you look at, sort of looking back, the tokens that do well are actually not indicators of sort of mass utility specifically to Web3, but they're very much market pricing information of what happens in the world.
Yes.
So we shouldn't be surprised, if Trump token does well, not because of the fact that it's just Trump, but because he is something that the whole world is talking about, and there's attention space that grabs it. When Sam token, at one point, Sam token was like a $27 billion token. That was pretty crazy. And of course, Flow and everything had its big moments. What happened? Facebook renamed itself to Meta, and COVID. Yep. And so everyone was talking about going virtual. The metaverse was the topic and everything else. And while we still believe very much in the open metaverse, when that thematic dropped, so did the token prices, but not related to utility. We have today 7 million daily active players playing Web3 games, 7 times larger than it was 3 years ago. Yeah. Right? So there's way more usage in Web3 gaming from a utility standpoint. So why is it that Web3 gaming tokens have underperformed? Yeah. Which has been harder to raise capital for, harder to invest. And that is because gaming has had a macro negative trend for the last 3 to 4 years. Yeah. And most people don't realize, everyone drew these charts that, from COVID, gaming is going to go this way. Yeah. Gaming was flat. Why was it flat? It was flat because post-COVID, actually people weren't playing more games, right? The same way that people didn't stop travel, kind of did the opposite. Second, there weren't a lot of new exciting titles that were coming out, right? So no reason to buy new consoles. So we're still hovering around $200 billion in revenue, not bad, but no growth. Third, and I think that's the biggest one, the cost of buying a game is roughly the same as it was 10, 15 years ago. Yeah. So while the money printer was basically just printing money, everything was inflated, gaming was gone. On real money terms, gaming companies actually struggled. Yeah. But what did you see the last few years? Layoffs, cost cutting, all that stuff, and distribution was broken. Apple taking their cut, all these things. Yeah. So narratively, gaming basically was negative, and that led basically into the entire gaming ecosystem. Last year, what tokens did really well outside of meme coins? AI tokens. And it wasn't because you had mass AI utility compared to gaming last year. It was, again, the mimetic nature and the pricing that comes with tokens. So why are we super bullish this year about gaming? And so come back to me end of the year and see if I'm right or wrong. One, there are a couple of macro gaming headwinds that will then also help the entire space, including Web3 and specifically fungible tokens. One of them is the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, the Nintendo Switch 2 has launched a new console in about 8 years. Yeah. It's a big event for you in the gaming industry. And they're pushing Mario Kart at a new price point. Yeah. 80 for digital, 90 for physical. Yeah. Okay, so that's a 30 to 40% increase from pricing today. Yeah. And if they succeed, which we think they will, it gives license for everyone to increase their games. You look at the history of gaming pricing, we didn't go from 20 to 25 to 29, we went from 20 to 39. Yeah. And we're going to see a similar type of step up. Yeah.
And the Nintendo Switch pre-orders are just like fully backed up in what looks like a very difficult consumer environment around the world. So
exactly.
And it's a very premium price.
It is premium price console. It's $449. So, so and tariffs aside, right? Yeah. There's a whole issue of there's this whole potential that gaming will see that increase. And then when someone buys a new console, on average, 12 to 15 new games are being sold with a console over the lifetime. So again, new record that stuff, higher pricing. And the bigger event, if it's not delayed again and again, in September or maybe October this year is GTA 6. Yeah. And we're super excited about GTA 6, not just because it's the biggest cultural event. Everyone's going to talk about it on the gaming side. It's going to drive console sales. Yeah. Lots of gamers aren't buying new consoles because they don't know why. GTA 6 will be the reason to buy them. Again, pushing the price up. And the other thing that most people may not know that GTA does allow you to run your own servers. And basically, we expect that companies are going to be running crypto rails on top of these servers. And if there's one game where the narrative of crypto, tokens, meme coins, and sort of gate come together, it definitely would be GTA.
What do you mean by running on crypto rails? Like, what does that apply for RP servers?
Well, for the RP servers, what it implies is that someone who runs their own GTA server can basically launch their own token or maybe use an existing token.
Like in game, something will happen. People will abstract that away,
or even the items. They can do whatever they want because essentially it's their own server. Yeah. But in the former regulatory framework, the US would have said, "Hey, that's a security. You can't do that." But in the current framework, I would imagine that Take-Two would probably just have a less than fair approach. Don't expect Take-Two to launch a token, but I don't think they're going to actively block it either, because it's just basically what the users are powered to do so.
Okay. The last question we'll go through very quickly is, what is rising in status in the gaming sector and what is falling in status? As an example, what's rising in status is limit breaks published app tokens. It's an interesting way for you to achieve programmability into your in-game economies. What's lowering in status, we think, are hyper-casual games in crypto, and just hyper-casual games generally. All the data points to gamers, particularly the youth, playing much more hardcore and mid-core games. Roham, let's go through what's rising in status and what's lowering in status.
I'm super excited about the confluence of someone figuring out how to do proper user acquisition for sustainable communities, and composability as in empowering developers to build on top. I think in an age where AI is making the cost of new software go down to zero, how do you lean into that and get players to become creators, get developers to sort of come in and really bring that promise of interoperability home? That's sort of rising in status. Falling in status, I think, is tariffs. We want them to go away. So that's
Justin?
Yeah, rising in status AI, and I would like to be a little bit more particular on that, but I agree with what Yat said about the headwinds that we've had in games. I would add one more, which is games compete against all other forms of entertainment on your phone. And for a long time, games were filling a vacuum on the phone, actually. And it's been almost 10 years of mobile growth where games were the only really entertaining thing to do on your phone, and social media was an okay second. And I think TikTok has now gotten to the point where actually it's competitive with most casual games. People find it more entertaining to spend an incremental minutes on TikTok than the average casual game. And one reason for this is it's so timely. And so when I think about AI and the impact it can have on games, it's that we've been fighting with two arms behind our back because we can't make content that's speaking to people about what's happening right now. And I actually think AI is going to solve this problem. So what TikTok did for video, AI will do for games, and then games will be able to get another leg up and competing against these other apps again.
Excellent. Guys, that's all we have time for. Thank you very much, everyone. Please give a round of applause to the wonderful panelists.